Shalom and welcome to everybody. My name is Al, and today in our Matthew 24 series, video 20, False Christ, False Messiahs, and What Makes a Real Messiah. This should be particularly interesting to our Jewish brothers because they have a lot at stake here, and they have only grown up hearing from their own rabbis that Jesus, Yeshua, is not the Messiah. And the question that we have today is, how and why does Messiah come twice? Well, I'd like to answer before telling you how. I'd like to share with you why this is the case. And in this, we have to go back to our first video series called Bereshit, in the beginning, Genesis 1:1. Where in the pictographs, it clearly shows that the creation, the Father created in his house, which is his creation. His Son is killed by the teeth, which is Satan. Worship in his sign, the Tav, the cross, the covenant. So that is what is set up. That is the big plan for everything. Now we get into the specifics. How does it begin? And we start with Genesis 3:15, where we have a garden. We have the Father, Satan, the man and the woman. And by the way, Adam and Eve, were they Jews or Christians, Muslims or Hindus? They were people. And as they were kicked out of the garden, whether you're a Jew, Indian, Chinaman, a Mexican, we all die today. And the seed of the woman from Genesis 3:15 is the Father's way, how he is going to start helping mankind, getting mankind back into his garden. But it even goes back further than that, because if we were to go back to Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 14, we find that Satan is a cherub as well. We see him here in the zodiac as Scorpio. But it tells us clearly in Ezekiel 14:15, someday he is going to go because he's the enemy. He's the devil. He's a serpent. He's certainly not just a snake. So we're starting to see that this is all spiritual as well. In the sign of Capricorn, we go back to the zodiac. And by the way, I'd like to tell most of you that I don't care for this word zodiac. I've always disliked it. It reminds me of people reading my palms, horoscopes, the rubbish in the back of your old newspapers telling you what your future is going to be. This is all witchcraft called mediums. And you know what they used to do to the mediums in the camp? They take them out and stone them to death. So, in all of this, you're going to see as we go around the circle, the Father has his people and Satan has his. Our little man, when we go outside, we look up. It's like an umbrella. We look up, and what do we see? We see not so much the zodiac, but the Mazarat, pronounced in Hebrew, Mazarah, and you will find it in Job 38. Chapter 38, verse 32. I don't know if any of you have read the book of Job, pronounced in Hebrew, E.W., recently, but it is a tremendous book, very deep. And again, my yeshiva students, Job was not a pagan Arab in the desert. He was a righteous man. And Job is a great book because it sets the stage for us all. We have the players in his book. Satan, the father, only instead of Adam and Eve, we have their progeny, Job in this case. And his life and what happens to this man brings everything full circle for everybody as a lesson to see what is here. Now, Job was a righteous man, but he was afflicted by the enemy and never could put it together. Why? because he could not see him. He could not touch him, just like you can't, because the enemy is spirit. And that part of the revelation was lost to Job, but he knew the general witness of the stars, which we have been sharing with you in Bullinger's book, The Witness of the Stars. And in chapter 38, verse 1, the Father finally confronts him for his hardness of heart and lack of information, and says this, "And Yahweh answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkens counsels by words without knowledge?" And then finally we get to verse 31. And it says in the English, "Can thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades, or loosing the bands of Orion?" The Pleiades is a star cluster in Taurus, the bull. And in the Hebrew, it's pronounced Kima, and it means in the Hebrew pictographs, what comes from the mighty hand of Yah, of course. And then Orion is Kessel, and it means the hand that supports and controls. So we start to see in all of this, and finally he asks Job, can you bring forth this system? Can you bring it out? Are you in control? He's not. And it always goes back to who is, and that is the Father. And so the history of our world is such that we have lost the information. But this seed of the woman, how the Father cares for mankind to destroy Satan in his house and get mankind back into Eden and to live forever, is why. And now we're going to start to see how it takes place at 5 o'clock in the sign of Capricorn. I'd like to discuss in summary first what we've already learned. Looking at the top of the planisphere, the Mazarat, we had already discussed in our previous video that the Great Sphinx in Egypt is really the head of a woman and the body of a lion, and it is the key to understanding the planisphere, the zodiac, the Mazarat, because it tells us where to break into the circle and to begin reading to follow the old story. And it begins with Virgo and the seed of the woman. And each primary sign, being 12 months out of the year, has 3 accompanying lesser constellations, if you will, that add to that particular star picture, that star story. Because looking up in the heavens, you certainly can't make out a woman, but it is the names of the stars which identify the image, the person, the thing, and through them collectively we can read it. So we begin here with Virgo, and Messiah is born there, the branch, Zechariah 6, and we see him making atonement, sacrifice in Victima with the first centaur, Centaurus, and Victima right there. The primary star that goes with that is Libra, the scales, and in the lower scale the star name means the price has been paid. And the question is what price? And that is the sins of mankind, because they broke the Father's only rule, ate of the tree of knowledge, and the result is we all die. But he has made a plan, and that plan is to clean his house, and he's going to begin with Satan, and through the process get people back into his garden. And it's the next sign in the sign of Scorpio, the enemy, stinging Ophiuchus, the serpent holder or handler, in the heel, which is exactly what Genesis 3:15 is. You shall crush the head of the enemy, the serpent, which here he is in the form of
the scorpion, but he's really the snake. He's many things. He's the Hydra. He's the Leviathan. He is the dragon. He's many things. He is the devil. So Messiah is the seed of the woman, the victim, the one struggling with this scorpion, this serpent, this false god of this planet right now. The next zodiac picture that we had discussed about in our last video was Sagittarius. And often in scriptures we have the cart in front of the horses, if you will. And here we see Messiah in the form of a conqueror with the arrow of Yahweh aimed directly at the heart of the serpent. And if you notice to the right, there is an altar, and an altar necessarily involves a sacrifice for something. And then today's zodiac picture for consideration is going to be at 5 o'clock, Capricornus, and that is going to be the next focus, the sacrifice, and to answer our Jewish friends why Messiah had to come, suffer, and how he comes again. In the sign of Capricorn, half goat, half fish. In all the ancient zodiacs or planispheres, we find a goat with a fish's tail. In the zodiacs of Dendera, Esna in Egypt, in its half goat, half fish, it is called Hupunis, which means the place of the sacrifice. In the Indian zodiac, it is the goat Passat traversed by a fish. There can be no doubt to the significance of the sign. In the goat, we have the atoning sacrifice. In the fish, we have the people of whom atonement is made. When we come to the sign of Pisces, we shall see more clearly that it points to the multitudes of those redeemed. The goat is bowing its head as though falling down in death. The right leg is folded under the body and seems unable to rise from the left. The tail of the fish, on the other hand, seems full of vigor and life. In Hebrew, the name is Gedi, the kid or the cut off, and the same in Arabic, Al-Gedi. Capricornus is merely the modern Latin name and means the goat. There are 51 signs in the sign, 3 of which are of the 3rd magnitude, 3 of the 4th. 5 are remarkable signs, Alpha and Beta, in the horn and the head, and remaining 3 in the fishy tail. The star is named Alpha. The Alpha star is named Al-Gedi, the kid or the goat, while the star Gamma is called Deneb Al-Gedi, the sacrifice cometh. Other stars in the sign not identified, Dabib, Sirabik, the sacrifice slain, Ma'asah, the slaying, Sa'ad, the Nakira, the record of the cutting off. So, within all of this, is it not that in accord with the scripture of truth, and there were 2 goats? Our next accompanying constellation to Capricorn is Sagitta, the arrow. Bullinger writes, "It is not the arrow of Sagittarius, for that has not left his bow, that is for the second coming. That arrow is for the enemies of Yahweh. This arrow is for the Son of Yahweh." It was this that he spoke when he said in Psalm 38:2, "Thine arrows stick fast in me, and thy hand passes me sore." He was stricken, smitten by Yahweh, afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions. Isaiah, Yeshayahu 53:4 and 5. He was pierced when he could say with Job, "The arrows of the Almighty are within me." Chapter 5, verse 4. Here the arrow is pictured to us in mid-heaven alone, as having been shot forth by an invisible hand. It is seen in its flight through the heavens. It is the arrow of Yahweh, showing that redemption is all of Yahweh. It was the will of Yahweh which Yeshua, Jesus, came to do. Remember Bereshit 1:1, Genesis 1:1, Genesis 3:15. The seed of the woman shall be bruised by the enemy. Yes, when we put all this together, it's spelling one thing: voluntary sacrifice. And now we pick it up in Revelations chapter 5, verse 5. And one of the elders said unto me, Weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the book, and to loose the 7 seals therein. And behold, and lo, in the midst of the throne, and in the 4 beasts, the cherubs, in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb, as though it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of Yahweh, sent forth in all the earth. Now, if we turn our scriptures back to Zechariah, and we go to chapter 3, it's talking about Joshua. In English, in the Hebrew, it's Yehoshua, the high priest, standing before the angel of Yahweh, and Satan standing at his right hand to resist him. This is a shadow picture, and it's in this respect that Yahweh says, Yahweh rebuke you, O Satan. Tell me, Christians, do you know where that is recorded in the New Testament? Check out the book of Jude. Now we go to verse 8 of the same chapter, and it says, Hear now, Joshua, Yehoshua, the high priest, thou and thy fellows that sit before thee, for they are men wondered at. For behold, I will bring forth my servant the branch. Remember Virgo holding a branch? Zechariah 6, For behold, the stone that I have set in Joshua has 7 eyes. Behold, I shall engrave an engraving thereof, saith Yahweh of hosts, and I will remove the iniquity of the land in one day. In that day, says Yahweh of hosts, they shall call every man his neighbor under his fig tree and under his vine. That's certainly for the future. However, Joshua in the King James, Yehoshua in the Hebrew, and note when we get to Ezra chapter 3 verse 8, the name has transformed itself into Yeshua, the name he was born with, which in King James is Jesus. That's 1611 afterwards. And by the way, King James never even lived to see the J. It followed him thereafter. And we turn to Mark, our book of Mark, because I want my Jewish friends to be aware of this. In Mark 10, picking up on verse 33, it says, Behold, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's telling them, We're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be delivered into the hands of the chief priests and the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death, and shall deliver him to the Gentiles. And they shall mock him, and shall scourge him, and shall spit upon him, and shall kill him, and on the 3rd day he shall rise. And in verse 45 it says, For even the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life as a ransom for many. And for my Jewish friends, I wish to finish with Yeshayahu, Isaiah 49, verse 1. Listen, O isles, unto me, and hearken, you people from afar. Yahweh has called me from the womb, from the bowels of my mother. He has made mention of my name, and he has made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand he hid me, and made me a polished shaft in this quiver, and he hid me. And he said to me, Thou art my servant, O Israel, in whom I am glorified. Now, we do know that in the 40s in Isaiah, that Israel and the suffering servant flip back and forth. But here it certainly is the suffering servant. Then I said, I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for naught, and in vain. Yet surely the judgment is with Yahweh, and the work with my Elohim. And now, said Yahweh, that formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob again to him, though Israel not be gathered, yet shall I be glorified in the eyes of Yahweh, my Almighty Elohim shall be my strength. And he said, it is a light thing that thou shouldest be my servant, to raise up the tribes of Jacob, and to restore the preserves of Israel. I will also give thee for a light to the Gentiles, that thou mayest be my salvation to the ends of the earth. And this fulfills Abraham's name, a father to many nations. Our next accompanying constellation to Capricornus is Aquila, the eagle. Here we have an additional picture of the effect of this arrow. In the pierced, wounded, and falling eagle, gasping in its dying struggle, and that pierced, wounded, and dying Savior whom it represents, after saying in Psalm 38:2, thy arrows stick fast to me, and in Zechariah 9:6, my heart panteth, my strength falleth me, as for the light of my eyes, it is gone from me. The names of the stars of all of them bear out this representation. The constellation contains 31 stars. The brightest of them is Alpha in the eagle's neck, and is a notable star of the first magnitude called Altair, Arabic, the wounding. And then we have the Gamma in the back called Tariad, wounded or torn. In the lower wing is named Al-Khair, which means the piercing. And in the tail, Al-Okal has the significant meaning of wounded in the heel. How can the united testimony of all of these names be explained except by acknowledging a divine origin, even of him who afterwards foretold of the bruising of the virgin son, the woman's seed, Genesis 3:15, a written word, ye, him who telleth the stars by their numbers, calls them out by their names, Yahweh. And we pick it up one more time in Isaiah, Yeshayahu, chapter 41, verse 26. Lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who has created these things? Who bringeth out their hosts by number, and calleth all of their names by the greatness of his might? For that he is strong in power, and not one faileth. Why sayest, O Jacob, and speakest, O Israel, my way is hid from Yahweh, and my judgment is passed over from my Elohim? Has not he known? Has not you heard? Has the everlasting Elohim, the Creator, Yahweh, the Creator of the ends of the earth, faileth not, neither is he weary in searching out and understanding. Verse 31. But they that wait on Yahweh shall renew their strength. Okay, we finally come to the last constellation, to the final story, and what Capricornus is all about in its accompanying constellation, Delphinus, the dolphin. This is a bright cluster of 18 stars, 5 which are of the third magnitude. It is easily distinguished by the 4 brightest, which are in its head. It's always figured as a fish, full of life and always with a head upwards, just as the eagle always with his head downwards. The great peculiar characteristic of the dolphin is its rising up, leaping and springing up out of the sea. When we compare this with the dying goat and the falling eagle, which conclusion can we come to but that we have the fulfilling of the picture and the completion of the whole truth set forth in Capricornus, resurrection from the dead. And we go to Yeshayahu chapter 53, that's Isaiah 53, and This is the most contested scripture in the Old Covenant for Jews because it is all about the resurrection of Yeshua Messiah. And verse 10, yet it pleased Yahweh to bruise him. He has put him in grief when thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin. He shall see his seed and shall prolong his days. And the pleasure of Yahweh shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied by his knowledge, and by my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Born again. And when we go back to the Gospel of John, chapter 3, we see the predicament that the rabbis were in when Yeshua was teaching, because the revelation wasn't available then. Remember, he had to be crucified. And it starts off with, and there was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. The same came to Jesus, Yeshua, by night. He couldn't be seen with him in the daytime. And he said, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from the Almighty, for no one can do these miracles that you do, except the Almighty be with him. And Yeshua answered and said unto him, Verily I say unto you, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of Yahweh. Nicodemus said to him, How can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb and be born? And Yeshua answered, Verily I say unto you, except a man be born by water and spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of the Almighty. That which is born of flesh is flesh, and that which is born of spirit is spirit. Marvel not that I say unto you, you must be born again.